It came upon a midnight clear, just after that glorious song of old.
Yep. It's been around since that first person complained about the noise of that herald angel's song.
Rolled their eyes because the little drummer boy was offbeat.
As long as there has been a season of wonder.
After the one candle was lit, and especially when the Yule log was too damp to light, almost every year,
There has been the humbug.
to which we say, bah, which is, by the way, a 19th century expression of contempt.
And made most famous by the words of Charles Dickens, who was a Unitarian, by the way. Bah, said Scrooge, humbug. He had heated himself with rapid walking in fog and frost, this nephew of Scrooge's, that he was all in a glow. His face was ruddy and handsome, his eyes sparkled, and his breath smoked again. Christmas, a humbug, uncle, said Scrooge's nephew.
Exactly. For many, seriously, this season is a humbug, which was slang in Dickens' time for fraud.
Oh, you mean like crooked, shady, phony, scammy, bogus, sharky, grifty, con, hustle, rip-off, double-dealing, or fast.
Yes. And anyway, when Ebenezer Scrooge says, bah humbug, he's not just being miserly. He's saying that the whole holiday is false and deceptive. And we know that feeling in some scale, many of us, because, of course, there is so much that's false and deceiving, so much that's just about merchandising that barely waits for the Halloween candy to get off the shelves. And the idea that everything will be okay in some miraculous way, this is a year that it's hard to hold that as true.
Bah humbug.
Indeed. We think of those words as a sneer, as scorn, but instead it is perhaps the gap between what we wish were true and what actually is.
Like a calling out or a calling in.
Yes. And so I'm going to invite us actually to try it. Because in our world, there are some things that feel false. There are some scams. I want to name them together, and your response is,
Bah humbug.
we enter this December 2024 with much to mourn. On this week, which included a tsunami alert, we say,
Bah humbug.
in a world in which the phrase, peace on earth, is like fingernails on a chalkboard, or looking through the wrong end of a telescope so far away, in which people in so many communities, in Gaza, in Ukraine, in Congo, especially children, are living in inhumane circumstances, we say.
Bah humbug.
In a holiday season which will end in a new year dawning, whose chaos is already spilling into this year, we say,
Bah humbug.
in a state which rejected a measure which would have banned the forced unpaid labor of those who have committed crimes and which also voted to return to an era of mass incarceration, we say,
Bah humbug.
in a county which is exploring turning its jail over to a for-profit corporation to make money off of other people's mistakes, we say,
Bah humbug.
in cities in which are once again feeling empowered to harass those who live without housing, to be sure that the reality of poverty does not dampen our merrymaking, we say,
Bah humbug.
to all of those who would make a dividing issue out of people's identities and who would make people who have a different status than they do the magnet for scorn, derision, and abuse, we say,
Bah humbug.
in a time when we most feel the absence of those we have lost, those who are not with us this season as they were in such seasons past. Together, let us hold as we witness to one another's being blue or disillusioned, which in this time makes sense. So let's say it this time quietly in our own hearts, here, where we have one another to hold all of it. Bah humbug. Thank you. When I was in middle school, I used to like to get up before anyone else did and go sit outside, especially in this time of year when the morning stars are so bright. I used to like to just go out there and see them, and the trick to this was that I couldn't turn on my light, so I had to get really good at walking in the dark. Walking past the furniture, knowing where the walls were, where the stairs were, that was a really important part. And I would weave around through the treachery of all of that, and then I would get down to the living room, the dining room, where I would lie down in the moonlight in front of the French doors. Sometimes, though, if I wasn't careful, on the way, I would bark my shin on the malicious side of a table or knock something else off another table. It was most likely, especially at this time of year, when the dark was at its deepest, which I loved because it gave me cover, and yet it also had its dangers. So we know that each year some of us hold traumatic memories around the holidays. For some of us, it's not a cheerful time. It's a time of year when we are very aware of the people that we've lost through death or disagreement, that are no longer part of our supportive and holiday and festive circles. And this is also a year, this particular year, when those who are feeling afraid from the reign of intimidation, which is now our daily news feeds, are perhaps having more cognitive dissonance with this particular holiday season. For those who have worked hard for decades with the idea that progress will continue, are now feeling disoriented and grief-struck. So there are many reasons to be in a humbug mode. Now, I called this service Humbugs and Hallelujahs, and about now, some of you are hoping for a little of the hallelujah part. Am I right? Yes, that hope, that second candle of Advent. You know, hallelujah, alleluia, that's an exhortation of rejoicing. And as much as the world in its daily analysis might not seem to support that, we actually need that too. And so for some of us, that may be the part we really have to reach for this year as a deep spiritual practice. Because we can't just keep bumping into things in the dark. Even though there's healing in the dark, we also need that lighthouse. In almost all the faith traditions of the world, where people live in colder and darker climes this time of year, we see the Alleluia celebrations. And so maybe after all those humbugs that we said together a while, we should all just say Hallelujah together. Let's try it. Hallelujah. How did that feel? Better. Okay, good. All right, that's good. We'll try it again in a little while. You know, there's a lot of customs around this, and I think it's important to think about these traditions. There's the custom of lighting a Yule log at Christmas, which was believed to have originated from the festival of Yule, which was a Scandinavian festival. The logs were lit to symbolize the heat and the light of the life-giving sun. and the log would be burned on the hearth for 12 consecutive days, cut into sections so that each section would be used to kindle the next section, section of light. And I think sometimes that's a good metaphor for us, right? Thinking about the things that we have that bring us that feeling of joy and hope that we can keep using to kindle other things that do that same thing. And for those who kept the tradition most strictly, they would keep the coals from the one year to light the log in the next year. That was the transmission of the tradition. In the Yalda night in Iran, reading poetry and eating pomegranates is a good way to get through a long night. And we know that any tradition with wise words can be a good thing. And some Buddhists this week celebrated Bodhi Day, which is the day which commemorates, in some Buddhist traditions, the enlightenment that the Buddha received under the Bodhi tree. Enlightenment is something we all could use a little more. Can I get an hallelujah? Yeah. So there's wisdom in this time of year. I think it's linked to our basic cellular knowledge of what we need to get through these nourishing, restoring, and also very dark days. And this year, that's in the context of a not very nourishing and not very restoring context as well. So it's important to think about that and to think about how we embrace traditions, how we pass them on, and how we might actually reject them in some cases as well. You know, I like to read about the etymology of words. And the etymology of the word tradition is very interesting. It has two strains of meaning. The first is that which is passed down, but the other is that which is given away in the sense of that which is betrayed. That's part of the etymology of the word tradition. So that, to me, that leads us to think about these holidays and the ways that they can be traitorous to us if we don't allow us to embrace them in the true spirit of where we are in any given year. And this year, we're in 2024. So, it's important to think about that. So, we will be traitorous to those traditions if we don't allow ourselves to feel both the alleluia and the humbug, both the sadness and the joy. So take a moment and look inside your own life and ask, where do you feel that sadness, that deep disillusionment of that which feels as if it's being taken away? And where do you feel that alleluia, that deep awe, that sense of wonder, that sense of the timelessness of something that has been handed down generation to generation? This is the time of year, according to the Farmer's Almanac, when it's easiest to see the stars. And you can see them at night, and if you get up early, because you have dogs like I do, you can see them in the morning too. We need that rest and that quiet, and we also need that light. The lighthouse allows us to see the rocks and the treacherous waters, those places where the traditions may be giving us away. You know, there's something else that happens this first week of December, just past, which is someone of Japanese American ancestry is always a little difficult. It was very difficult for my father, and it's Pearl Harbor Day. And here in our community, there's a tradition where they light the beacon at the top of the mountain on Pearl Harbor Day. And that was always a hard thing for me to see, that beacon, every year. Except now, I think about those COVID months when they lit the beacon every Sunday night so that we could go out and see it and feel our connection with one another. And I would walk every Sunday night to the end of my street and look up at the mountain and see that light, and I felt it in a very different way. So a couple nights ago when I looked up and I saw the beacon was on, it didn't feel like the same tradition. It felt less treacherous. And that is the spirit of enlightenment. That is the spirit of how joy and woe are woven fine. As William Blake says, that I believe we can greet these holidays with. As much as we need to hold both the nurturing, we also need to hold the hope. You know, before Siddhartha, the prince who renounced his worldly life to become the enlightened Buddha, reached that enlightenment that is celebrated in the tradition this week. He had to face the realities of the world. He had to face what was truly happening in the world that he had been shielded from for so long. Now, there are some of us watching today and some of us in this room that haven't been shielded very much. And we are particularly holding you today. And there are some of us who have had a lot of enlightenment in these last weeks. And it might be that there's something in that will be a beacon and a lighthouse in these days to come. So in this time of humbug and hallelujah, I invite you to allow space for both, to find the ways to center yourself, to try out things you might never have tried, like practices and connections and risk-taking that might keep you going, not only through these holidays, but into this 2025. In this time when we face a chaotic and disillusioning world, we are wise to take all of the gifts of this season, the healing darkness, the beckoning lights, the stark beauty of the stars. So I invite you to say it again to yourself. I hold your tears. I hold your joy. Enlivenment, enlightenment, let us not deny ourselves either one. We need the wisdom of the critic and the skeptic, and yet we do not need to give ourselves away and be traitors to our own dreams. We need to claim the power of imagination and take in the wonder and awe of this time, because we might need that as provisions on a journey that is before us. Bah humbug and hallelujah.